Welcome to the International Sunday School lesson for Sunday, December 3rd, 2023. The title of this lesson in Boyd's Commentary, as well as Towson's Press International Sunday School Commentary, is The Faith of Ruth. Hey, if you enjoy our lessons, please let us know by liking, commenting, subscribing, and hitting the little bell to be notified when we post each week. To find out more about Jordan Christian Center, a virtual ministry aiming to transform lives by equipping, educating, empowering, as well as encouraging the world, please visit us at jordanchristiancenter.com. Hey, I'm Minister Adam, and Sunday School is now in session. Now, as we get started, let's start with a moment of prayer. Heavenly Father, be with us as we go through your word, Lord, to teach us to be more faithful and how all things work together for the good who love you, Lord. Lord, we love you, honor, and praise your name. In your Son, Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Let's get into our lesson. Our scripture be coming from Ruth, chapter 1, verses 6 through 18, and then we'll skip over to verse 22. The main thought will be coming from Ruth, chapter 1, verse 16, which says, "But Ruth replied, 'Don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I go. Wherever you live, I live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God.'" Now, as we do each week, we'll start with a little background. This is the first lesson in a new quarter, as well as a new unit that's titled Profiles in Faith. This week's lesson is coming from the book of Luke. Now, according to the Jewish tradition, the prophet Samuel wrote the book of Ruth. The book was written to the Jewish people, likely during the time of David's reign as king. This audience was familiar with David, yet likely lacked the background of his family line beyond his father, Jesse. The book provides two benefits to the audience. First is a powerful relational account, and second is a theological narrative, connecting David with his ancestors in a manner of reflecting God's love and divine plan. Now, Ruth begins by highlighting the judge's theme of Israel's needing a king and exploring the misery and emptiness of a singular family might experience during these dark times in those days. Now, all males of the Israelites' family had to leave Bethlehem, and they had died in Moab, leaving Naomi, which is one of the main characters in the book of Ruth, without a male relative to care for her. The book is not just this love story about Ruth and Boaz, but it's a story about God and how he restores those who look to him with hope. Now, Ruth is an outsider, a Moabite of all people. Now, a Moabite should make you uneasy at this point, especially if you've ever read the book of Numbers, chapter 25, she breaks social conventions to do the right thing by her former mother-in-law, Naomi. Ruth's trust and faith in God and commits herself to his people. She makes an offering of marriage to Boaz in an understanding way when you look further in chapter 3 of the book of Ruth. Now, today, it would seem weird for a woman to ask a man for marriage. However, it's actually culturally honorable during that time. It's not scandalous in any way. God honors Ruth's integrity and due diligence by weaving her into the great story of salvation. And this is where our lesson picks up today in Ruth chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, which says, "Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab. For she had heard that in the country of Moab that the Lord had visited his people by giving them some bread. Therefore, she went out from the place where she was, and her two daughter-in-laws with her, and they went on their way to return to the land of Judah." So here we find that Naomi received news from her home country of Judah that the Lord had answered their prayers by giving them ample rain and as well as fertile crops, and the famine had ended. In fact, we find it's the famine that pushed the Israelites to Bethlehem from Judah to the Moabite land because of the famine. So when Naomi hears this, it prompts her, she had no husband, she had no son. So wisely, she decided to leave the land of Moab and return to her own people in Judah for better economic prospects. Remarkably, both her daughter-in-laws, Orpah and Ruth, decided to accompany her, leaving behind their families in Moab. So their love and concern for Naomi, beyond mere pity, motivated them to join her on this journey. So though Naomi was in a state of grief and despair at the loss of her husband and her sons, it's easy to imagine that the family of bonds of love and friendships that had formerly been made between her and her daughter-in-law. So we find here that Naomi is caring for Ruth and Orpah during that time, and she wanted to address the situation by going back to her hometown. Now, as we move down to verses 8 and 9, it says, "And Naomi said to her two daughter-in-laws, 'Go, return each of you to her mother's house. The Lord dealt kindly with us as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband.' She then kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept." So Naomi is actually giving these two ladies very sound advice. She's actually telling them, no, don't come with me. I'm going back to my land, but this is your land. You should stay and just go back to your mother's home instead of following Naomi to a foreign land. See, they had no husband, and during that time, not having a husband was very hard. So she prayed to God for kindness upon them, just as they had shown her kindness to her and her son before her son's passing. She also hoped for them to find some good husband in Moab and to be safe in their new homes. So Naomi kissed them both goodbye, expressed her love to them, and gave them her blessings to go on their way. And there's no need to feel any type of guilt. But Orpah and Ruth, however, they wept aloud as they left, showing that their love and affection for their mother-in-law. Now let's talk about this situation here, because we have three widows here. And widows during the biblical times had a very rough life without the covering of a husband. Naomi only wanted to give her two daughters-in-laws the best opportunity for survival. But their love for Naomi was greater than any opportunity or any other happiness or security. They wanted to stay with her. And this is important because it shows the heart of Ruth, which God will use in the bloodline of the coming Messiah. Now, as we move down to verses 10 through 13, it says, "And they said to her, 'Surely we will return with you to your people.' But Naomi said, 'Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? There are still sons in my wombs that may be your husbands. Turn back, my daughters. Go, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should say have a husband tonight, and shall also bear sons, would you wait for them until they are grown? Would you restrain yourself from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me.'" So in this case, as they would like to go and be with her, what we find is Naomi is kind of pushing them away. Now, while she's trying to return to her home, because Jewish law would allow actually widows and people to eat off other farms and plants and from other people. So she knew she can go back to her land and probably at least be able to eat something. But for them, it's much better for them to marry. So what she's telling them here is she don't have a husband. And she's too old to bear a child. And if she did bear a child for them to marry again, then would they wait 16, 17 years till this boy grows up if she have a boy? So she's telling them that she doesn't have any close family that can take care of her. So how can she take care of them? So this is extremely important because Naomi is really laying it down for them. Now, I want to point out something. The reason why she said she have no sons for them, and do they really want to wait for her to have more sons, is during these times it was custom that if a husband passes away, then his sibling, his brother, would then take on his wife so his wife can continue to be cared for and the bloodline can continue. However, in this situation, Naomi had no more sons. Her daughter-in-laws were married to her son, and both her sons and her husband died in Moab. So here we find Orpah and Ruth. They revealed their true intentions to go with Naomi as she returned to Judah and live with her people. Now, I'm sure that the love and affection being expressed between Naomi was not lost because they really wanted to be with them. But Naomi's concern, however, is for the future welfare of these two ladies who she definitely feel they definitely would need a husband if they wish to survive. Now, notice that Naomi has dispensed with this term daughter-in-law, and she actually called them my daughters at this time. In various ways, Naomi is trying to convince them that that husbands were what they needed for their future welfare. She could not provide them husbands, and she didn't want them to miss out on the opportunity of remarriage and marital love and the security of a future with their husbands. Now, the lesson here is when we have decided that God is against us, because towards the end of this, in verse 13, Naomi mentioned that I have nothing for you. And what she's saying here is, towards the end, she said, she don't know why God's hand has gone out against me. So this is where it turned very interesting. So what we learn here is that when we decide God is against us, we usually exaggerate our hopelessness. We become so bitter that we can't see the ray of light peeping around the clouds. It is God who broke the famine and opened up a way for her to get back home. So even though her husband has passed away, Naomi has an opportunity to go back to her homeland. God is still showing her favor. However, due to the other things, she can't see that. So she believed God is against her. It was God who preserved a kinsman that will continue Naomi's line when we get to Ruth chapter 2. And it was God who constrains Ruth to stay with Naomi, which is very important. But Naomi, in this particular case right now, is so embittered by God's hard providence that she can't see his mercy at work in her life. How many of us do this sometime? That what we can see and hear seems so much like gloom and doom that we can't see the hand of God moving and shifting. We can't see the things that we should be grateful for at the time in our life that God had provided for us because we're clouded by the things that we feel is not going our way. And that's where this is where Naomi is at this time. Now, as we move down to verse 14, it says, then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So now there's a little bit of a shift. Naomi admitted that their future was more bitter for herself because Naomi was a widow with no future prospects due to her age. The future prospects, however, for Orpah and Ruth were a little better because they were young and they could still find a companion. But by saying the hand of God was against her, Naomi was facing her hard reality head on. Now notice, she didn't curse or say anything disparaging about the Lord. She was stating what she felt like. It was a cold, hard fact. Naomi did not want to draw her daughter-in-laws into the wake of her ministry, her misery at that time. That's what she was trying to plead to these two young ladies. But as we move into the journey of Ruth, this is really where it begins based on this decision in verse 14. So as they wept aloud to their mother-in-law, this is when each of them made a different decision. The scripture does not go on to cast any type of judgment on Orpah as far as in regards to her decision. Oprah left Naomi with Naomi's blessing, and Naomi prayed to the Lord for her well-being. Oprah's decision actually made the most sense. It made the most sense because now she can go out and find a husband and be taken care of and have the security that she would need. Ruth, on the other hand, it says she continued to cling to Naomi. Now that's the one that didn't make sense. Naomi tried once again to persuade Ruth. And this is where we move to verses 15 through 18, which says, and she said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And the Lord does so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. When she saw that she was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her. So here we find Naomi must have thought at first Ruth was captured in the emotions of the moment. However, after all this experience and leaving so much behind, she found that Ruth really loved her, and she wanted to be a part of her as much as she could. Surely Ruth was not thinking clearly in Naomi's way of thinking. Naomi pointed out how Orpah had already been on her way to the only life that made sense, a life with her people and with her gods. But Ruth, she's saying, Ruth, go ahead and follow her. But Naomi would not blame Ruth for doing so. Ruth made a decision. Ruth spoke up. Now, until this point of the story, both of her daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah, had always been mentioned together. But when Ruth speaks, however, we learn what her intentions were. Ruth has a voice. She has a will. She's not afraid to use them either. Ruth here had apparently thought this through. And she outlines the path that she chose for herself, an extraordinary, unconventional, even risky path that will make her way and truly define her. Ruth truly meant to follow Naomi wherever Naomi chose to go. She intended to make her home with Naomi and be there for her and with her. She was committing herself to go to Judah, Naomi's home country, and to Bethlehem, her husband's ancestral homes. So Ruth understood that Naomi's people would become her people. And this is not really any half measure taking in this instance. Ruth was going all the way with it. It's exactly what she wanted, and she knew what she had to work with. Ruth's intention was to become Naomi's God, is to become her God. And it's difficult to know how deep Ruth had, contemplated that part, but it was an attraction to Naomi's God, which motivates all of this. Or was it mainly love for Naomi? We won't know, but we do know God's hand within it. The very fact that Ruth mentioned the part about Naomi's God becoming her God makes us think that Naomi's faith is very important, and she understands that Naomi's faith is something she believed in, as well as how God has helped her. So Ruth made the wise decision overall to follow the only wise God. Now, had not Naomi prayed to the Lord on behalf of both of her daughters-in-law? Had not Naomi pronounced God's blessing upon them? It's hard to imagine Naomi speaking of her faith in the presence of, her sons when they were alive and or with their wives. So even when Naomi spoke of the hand of God against her, Ruth could possibly see that it's come out of Naomi's grief. So therefore, she looked past all of that and said, I'm going to follow you, and I'm going to follow your God. And Ruth went on this journey, which turns out to be an amazing journey for her. See, the more you ponder these words that Ruth said here, the more amazing they become. Ruth's commitment to her desolate mother-in-law is simply astonishing. First, it means that she have to leave her own family and land. Second, it means as far as she know, the life of widowhood and childlessness will be what she have to deal with because Naomi had no man to give her. And if she had married a non-relative, her commitment to Naomi's family would be lost. And third, it means going to an unknown place with new people and new customs and new language. Fourth, and finally, it was a commitment even more radical than marriage. She said, where you die, I will die, and there be buried. In other words, she will never return home, even if Naomi dies. But this amazing commitment of all of this that she said, your God would be my God. Naomi has just said in verse 13 that the hand of God has gone forth against her. Naomi's experience with God was bitter at that time. But in spite of all of this, Ruth forsakes her religious heritage and gods back in Moab and makes the God of Israel, the only wise and true God, he makes it her God. Perhaps she made this commitment, years before when being and dealing with Ruth. But whatever the case is, Ruth has just made a decision that actually got her name written in the Bible and in the bloodline of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. From the book of Ruth, we can picture God's ideal woman, faith in God that goes beyond the present bitter setback, freedom from the security and comforts of this world, the courage to venture into unknown and strange area, and radical commitment in the relationships appointed by God. So when we look at Ruth, it shows this ideal woman with the character of God. Now, later we'll be introduced to the character of a godly man, a godly husband, Boaz. But right now, it's focusing in on Ruth. Our lesson then skips down to verse 22, which says, so Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. Now they come to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Now, the first part of this verse contains a brief summary of what had happened so far. Ruth the Moabite has followed her mother-in-law into a land that Naomi was familiar with. But as far as Ruth, she's completely unfamiliar with this. She has done, and so out of the love and devotion to her mother-in-law, Naomi. Ruth have faith in helping her mother-in-law through the grief, which is working out for the both of them. By journeying where Naomi's journey, lounging where Naomi lounged, and taking on Naomi's people as her own, as well as by following and serving Naomi's God, Ruth is doing exactly what she said she would do. Now, we should also talk a little bit about them when they got to Bethlehem. Now, the reason they left, Naomi's family left Bethlehem so long ago is because of it was a famine in the land. These women are, they're widows. One of the reasons Naomi wanted to go back home is because she know that at minimum, according to the Jewish laws, that with crops and stuff like that, you could eat off of other people's crop. And look what happened in verse 22. It said when they got to Bethlehem, it was the beginning of the barley harvest. So when they got there, both literally and figuratively, they went back to a fertile place. See, the first chapter of Ruth begins again with the famine. Now, by the end of this chapter 1, the story evolves into a story of abundance and harvest. Interestingly enough, though, the barley season and the land takes stage throughout, and it unfolds in the book of Ruth. This is how she's going to meet Boaz. All of these things culminate, but it begins by Ruth taking on the God of Naomi by helping her mother-in-law, by choosing to go on and have her faith and trust in the God of Naomi. Now, before I conclude, the rest of this story is so important. I would definitely encourage you to read the book of Ruth, because all throughout Scripture, the lesson kind of ends at this point. How Ruth's decision to follow Naomi, how it turned out. So Ruth 2-4 talks about how it turned out. Ruth somehow knew about the provisions in the law of Moses concerning gleaning from the fields. This is a law, again, that where landowners were compelled by God not to harvest every morsel of their product in the field, but leave some of it on the edges of the field to be gleaned by the poor and by foreigners that's traveling through the land. Ruth told Naomi that she was going to glean from the fields belonging to Naomi's late husband's clan. In this way, Ruth was seeing that they would have food. So as we look at this story about Ruth is extremely important, because in the end, we find that Ruth actually meets Boaz. That's one of the fields that they begin to glean from. And this relationship grew to the point where where Ruth asked Boaz to marry her. And it talks about the character of a real man of God and a real husband, as well as we just talked about the character of God's ideal woman. So in conclusion, this big message in this small story, it shows how God is constructing this grand story out of small, seemingly inconsequential stories of everyday people. This little story is intentionally framed at the beginning and the end by a larger story within the Bible. Ruth shows how God is at the every day-to-day activity of average people like you and I. All the characters face life's normal challenges. There was death, there was moving, there was lack of financial resources, there was family responsibilities, there were family problems, all the things we face today. And we find God is unwavering in showing this story of redemption out of all the details. The book of Ruth encourages us to view our day-to-day lives as part of God's bigger plan for our lives and the world. Amen. Brothers and sisters, until next week, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn towards you and give you peace. I'm Minister Adam, and you be blessed.